guys, here we are in part 2 of chapter 17. So we are dealing with the arthropods. Yesterday or day before we talked about in general the characteristics of the arthropods and then a little bit about the chelicerates, the spiders and the scorpions, kind of the creepy things. And today we're going to talk about another one of the groups within the arthropods, and these are the crustaceans. This is another fairly large group, and within the animal kingdom itself. In phylum Arthropoda, it is the second largest group behind insects, and it's behind by a lot in this particular group, but they are still very numerous compared to many of the other animals that we think of. So characteristic-wise, they have all the characteristics of the arthropods that we talked about, the open circulatory system, the jointed appendages, compound eyes, all that kind of stuff. But they do have some fairly distinctive crustacean features. And you can see from these pictures that, of course, the crustaceans are things like crabs or lobsters. There's a shrimp right there in the middle. They all have the shells. We'll talk about those in a minute. They all have some form of antenna, which we'll get to. So they're fairly distinctive within the arthropod phylum for some very specific characteristics. Okay, so these structures, some of these we'll talk about a little bit more when we do our crawfish dissection, but I do want you to know them. And I think I have tried to get all of the vocab words highlighted for you, so that's what those are. So with the crustaceans, first things first, the cephalothorax. Remember, that is the head and the kind of the chest or the thorax fused together. It is covered by what is called a carapace, and this carapace is one big piece of exoskeleton. It's called the exoskeletal plate, and it is a covering that kind of bends over and covers the back of the animal, but also the sides down to where their legs are. Underneath that carapace are most of the vital organs, the gills, the heart, and the digestive stuff all kind of starts in there. And so it is a protective covering. In the tail region or the abdomen of crustaceans, they are also covered by exoskeleton, but in this case they are covered by little plates or little kind of strips of the exoskeleton. That is for flexibility. This is where the muscle of the animal is. If you've ever eaten lobster, that's what you're eating, is the tail, or in a shrimp, that is what you were eating. And so that's where the muscle is, and so it needs to be able to move a little bit. On the abdomen, or kind of extending down from it, are little appendages called swimmerets. They do kind of what they sound like. They help the animal to swim. They are like little flippers. They do have 5 pairs of walking legs. And so on the picture I have over there, it has, and I know my head's kind of in the way, they have the walking legs labeled right here. This cheliped, which we'll get to in a minute, is also considered a leg, and so it is the 5th pair if you're counting those. On the first 3 pairs, depending on the type of crustacean we're talking about, they sometimes will have claws. Particularly the first walking leg has usually a pretty sizable pincher or claw on it. That's the cheliped. The next 2 sometimes will have smaller pinchers on them. Those are used obviously for feeding, for catching for other animals, for holding on to them. If you've ever been pinched by a crawfish, you know that they're pretty strong, and once they lock onto something, they're gonna hang on. And so that is a big either defensive mechanism or a hunting mechanism, I guess you could say. The crustaceans very often lose those, especially those the first pair of walking legs, and they grow back. These animals have the ability to regenerate some of their body parts. So sometimes if you've ever captured a crawfish, and the one we dissect, we'll just have to kind of look and see. Oftentimes those chelipeds are 2 different sizes because one has fallen off and is regrowing, and so it can oftentimes be much smaller than the other one. Okay, now these guys also have antennae, which we talked about a little bit with the just arthropods in general. Chelicerates aren't really known for their antenna, but crustaceans definitely are, and insects will be also. But they will have 2 to 3 sets of antennae, and depending on the size, they can either be these longer ones, which are just called antennae, and these are for touch or for smell. This is how they find their food or find a mate. And then they have the shorter ones, which are called antennules. And these are very often used for balance. This is like your inner ear function. And so they have these antennules, and they are attached to little organs that sit kind of right between their eyes. And they are lined with little cilia, and the cilia are in contact with a grain of sand very often, and that grain of sand is moving back and forth, kind of rolling through there, and it helps the animal to sense which way is up. Basically, are they on their backs or are they upside down? Remember, they're in a water environment, and so they can float or be, knocked over by a wave or whatever it is. And so those antennules help them to kind of orient themselves right side up or not. Crustaceans also, some of them, not all of them, have cells called chromatophores. And these chromatophores, that chroma prefix has to do with color. These give them the ability to change their color. It helps them to camouflage. It helps them sometimes in mating to be more noticeable to a potential mate. And so just like some of the mollusks, they can change their color. They have mandibles, which are little appendages, and we'll talk about them again when we dissect, that are close to their mouth, close to where the food is going in, and these are used to, like your teeth basically, or your jaw, to crush food up. Your jawbone is actually called your mandible. And then breathing, they use gills. And so crustaceans can live in or on land or in water. They'll have to be near water though, because they have these gills, and lots of times they have to get back in the water a lot. If they re-wet the gills, then the gills can continue to help them bring oxygen in. And so even though they're on land, they're still using their gills to breathe. A few smaller crustaceans can breathe through their skin, but for the most part, the gills are kind of the way to go. Now, reproduction for these crustaceans, it's kind of weird, comparatively speaking, I guess. For most crustaceans, reproduction or fertilization, I guess, is external. And they do mate though. The female does take in sperm into her body, and then she stores it until she is ready to lay her eggs. And as the eggs pass out of her body, they pass through basically the sperm that she has been storing, and the actual fertilization takes place outside of her body. She will lay the eggs in a little nest very often that she has kind of dug out. Some crustaceans, just like with the chelicerates, will brood their eggs. They will care for their eggs and kind of guard them. Others, they just leave them and hope for the best. There are some of the terrestrial crustaceans, some of the crabs that are more land animals, do use internal fertilization but still lay eggs. And now, last thing, in the environment, crustaceans are a big deal in the aquatic environment. They are what are called ecosystem engineers, which means that they have a very big impact on their environment. They do a lot to help clean up their environment. They are food sources, all those kinds of things. And so their actions tend to have a big impact on other species. And so first off, they're filter feeders. So the smaller ones, some of the shrimp, the krill, which we'll talk about some more in a minute, they clean up particles out of the water. And they are so numerous that they can really clean a lot of the ocean. And so they help to keep the water pretty clean, which helps other animals just for visibility, for what they're taking in as they process the water and try and get out oxygen. So that's helpful. They are scavengers. They can, as a group, eat or basically break down the body of a blue whale in a number of days. And so organisms die, the bigger animals, they will die and sink to the bottom, and that's when these crustaceans will move in. And they will eat it down to the bone and strip it clean, and again kind of help to recycle and process some of these things. And then the other main thing is that they are a source of food. Krill are crustaceans. They are the main diet for many larger animals like blue whales. I mean, big animals eat these teeny tiny little krill. And these are called, oops, my picture ended up in front of it. These are often called a keystone species. That's the word that's covered up by me right now. A keystone species, because they are so important and such a big part of the diet of these larger animals that the big animals, the blue whales, basically follow the krill around. And so where the krill go, the whales go. And so that is huge because it is just an indication of how important that species is in the food chain and in the ecosystem in the ocean. Anyway, crustaceans are cool. I hope you like it. We'll do some more notes on these tomorrow. Please let me know if you have questions. Bye, guys.